Let's move into the
State of the state.
state of the state.
State of the state.
So this state of the state, I'm going to talk about the history of law enforcement and how it pertains to society over time. Civilization was created when society invented class structures. And law enforcement was created when those class structures were invented. The first civilization, as we understand civilization to mean, likely was Sumeria. I mean, even if it's not the first, it's one of the earliest. Sumeria was able to develop a sedentary society. They weren't nomads. They developed primitive agriculture so they were able to live in place and grow crops. And this was due to settling along the fertile valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Since the Sumerians developed agriculture, they were able to produce surplus resources. And since they had surplus resources, they could sustain a larger workforce. So what happened is Sumerians went up into the hills around them as far as like modern day Turkey and Iran. They went out searching for in the hills, and they imprisoned nomads and hunter-gatherers to take as slaves. And so this dynamic, when you have surplus resources controlled by a dominant class to sustain an oppressed working class, is the foundation of all class-based societies. Person 1 controls the farm. They enslave person 2 who works the farm. Person 2 generates enough food for several people. Person 1 uses some of that food to free the slave and then distributes the rest of the food to the rest of the upper class. So the slave creates what is needed to survive. And then more so, the owner then seizes the surplus value from the slave who actually performed the labor. For primitive slave societies like the Sumerians, the law enforcement officers were the slave masters who forced the enslaved underclass to work. Similarly, cops under a capitalist economy exist to protect, reinforce, and replicate a capitalist class society. In the same way slave masters enforced the laws of a slave society, police enforce the laws of a capitalist society. All societies sustain themselves by both a repressive state apparatus and an ideological state apparatus. So, to use another early society as an example, the dominant class of the Aztecs and Mayas retained powers through repression, namely imprisoning enemies and peasants for compulsory labor. That is just pure physical, material repression, but they also retain power through ideology, and this would be shamans and priests, rituals, social structures. Those things justified their material repression. For example, if you're going to be sacrificed, if you're a slave and you're going to be sacrificed on a pedestal, they're going to cut open your penis and smoke your blood.
The Mayans smoked penis blood.
Cut your head off, throw you down a pyramid, whatever type of imagery you have of, Mesoamerican human sacrifice. You need to believe that the spilling of your blood will save humanity. That makes you accept your fate. That is what the ideological apparatuses do. Yeah, we're sacrificing you. Yes, you're a slave, but the blood spilled from you will give us, more sun. It'll save the drought. It'll commemorate our transition into the new year. It'll do this or that. Believing in that justifies the repressive apparatus. So under capitalist societies, our repressive apparatuses are primarily law enforcement, although if you live internationally, it's really the military. But also, of course, our ideological apparatuses are the media, schools, social clubs, families. We're inundated with things that are constantly telling us it's okay if a cop kills someone if they broke a law. It's okay if this or that happens. Everything we're bombarded with is justifying the repression that the state does to us. CNN is constantly justifying how repressive the U.S. is, and the reason they're perceived as quote-unquote liberal is because conservatives already buy into how repressive the government is. Conservatives don't need to be sold that police aren't actually bad. They're like, yeehaw, police! They rule! Sorry for doing the southern thing. I don't like to demonize southern people, but that's just my dumbass accent. Sorry it's southern, but I have nothing against southern people. Maybe I should do a Boston accent for my dumb conservative, because I do have something against Boston people. The police... let me try my Boston accent. Yo, the coppers are here to save us. Save Dunkin' Donuts from these poor people. That's wicked awesome for the cops to do that. So conservatives don't need to be convinced the cops are good. Liberals do, though. So liberals watch CNN, and CNN is constantly saying, we know this is bad, guys. Trust us. We understand. But then again, maybe the cops did have to use force. Maybe in this situation they actually did. Did you ever think about that? CNN is perceived as liberal because they're the ones covering for the police the most. So the function of law enforcement is quite simply to repress the working class. Cops literally exist as security guards for the capitalist class. And this isn't just some esoteric thing. This isn't me theorizing with my head in the clouds. This is foundational understanding of what makes a society and how classes function. So let's talk about defunding the police a little bit. What would defunding the police even look like? I mean, ultimately, it would be zero funding for police. And I think that is defund the police is a great slogan for these protests because, well, Democrats will say that's just impossible. That's not a majoritarian position. We can't take that because most people don't agree with it. And in a way, they're right, because here's the truth of it. If you completely defund the police, you functionally end capitalism. If there are no police protecting private property and presuming the military wouldn't just then take the role of police, you would have the end of capitalism as we know it. There would be no one protecting the material reality of what capitalists control and what they have. So, think about it like this. Police are completely defunded. What's going to happen when a Target gets looted? Nothing. There would obviously be a reaction, a conservative reaction, where militias would be defending Target, but they would just be playing the role of private police and probably more willing to. I mean, well, let's not go there because I'm kind of going off rails. Yes. So, I mean, you may be thinking, what about murders and rapes? Cops deal with that, and those types of things aren't inherent duties to law enforcement. Cops arrest murderers, they sometimes arrest rapists, but not usually. They enforce law that way, but who actually solves the crimes? Detectives, coroners, things like that. And detectives don't need to be in the same department as the people who go up and pick up the murderers to go to prison. So imagine all the different things police do. You have the beat cop who just is wandering the street, harassing people, telling panhandlers to screw off, stuff like that. Those can just be completely eliminated. That is the most pointless ass job ever. I don't think a beat cop has ever prevented a crime once. They just harass people. That job just needs to go. And then you have cops like investigators, detectives, coroners. I don't know if coroners are technically cops, but I do know that in feudal times, coroners were kind of like the progenitors to a police force. To a detective force. They were the first detectives because they were examining bodies. So coroners don't need to be in the police force. Detectives don't need to. So imagine this. Someone's murdered, right? Let's say detectives look into it. Why do detectives need to be part of the same department as the beat cops who just like harass homeless people all day? Why do they need to work together? They don't. And I think if detectives were unarmed, didn't wear the stupid uniform, weren't wearing bulletproof vests or whatever, detectives were just like pencil necks working in an office investigating forensic evidence, they would functionally no longer be a cop anymore. They would still be coming to conclusions that were reinforced by the police state, but they wouldn't be part of the police themselves. They would be independent. And you could do this with any part of the police. Why not just divvy up the police department into different sections? That way they don't all feel an allegiance to each other. Once they have an allegiance to each other, they have solidarity as the enforcers of capitalist law enforcement. We don't want detectives who feel like they're on the side of capitalist class law enforcement. We want detectives who are just simply inspecting evidence. And besides all that, when have you ever heard of a cop preventing a crime? People always say, "Oh, who are you gonna call when someone breaks into your house?" For one, cops break into people's houses all the time. That's how Breonna Taylor got killed. They can break into your house wearing plain clothes and shoot you if you try to defend yourself, as anyone would, because you would presume that they're a burglar if it's a plainclothes person breaking into your house. But besides that, imagine someone else breaks into your house who's not a cop. What are the cops gonna do? Usually they come like 3 hours later, say, was anything stolen? And you're like, yeah, like, say a DVD player, my PlayStation was stolen, this or that. And they're like, oh, well, we'll look out for it, but nothing we can really do, bye. That's what the cops do. Is anyone really gonna miss that? The only people who would miss that are middle class people who identify as members of the consumer class, suburban, aspiring feudal lords who have their little package of land out in the suburbs, and they're like, this is my domain. They will never have to call the police. No one wants to go by their shitty house, but they are still enamored with the idea of the police. What if someone breaks in? I need to call the police because they're the good guys and they would stop the bad guys. The people who are most defensive of police are just defending their imagination of what police do, and that's what that is. They don't interact with police enough to know that they're really completely freaking worthless. Cops don't protect and serve us. They protect private property and serve the capitalist class. They see anyone who is not a capitalist with private property as the zombie mob. The role of cops is to systematically keep you from rising up against the overclass. So let me just leave you with a couple questions and then we can wrap up this society show. Would Sumerian slaves be justified in seizing the barley he works for his master? Would an Aztec slave be justified in seizing the corn he works for his master? Would feudal peasants be justified in seizing the wheat they work for their lords and vassals? And similarly, would an American slave be justified seizing the cotton that they work on a plantation? All of those things are examples of a working class rising up against the law enforcement arm of the dominant class. It is 2020 and we are the common workers and laborers. We built and maintain this society. We are on the same trajectory of the working class of history. They are our progenitors, and they fought sometimes to the death for a more equitable, more fair, working class-based society for future people. We are in their lineage. If we all stopped working, our society would collapse. And you, yes, your labor, you, the person listening to this, is the foundation of not only our civilization, but all of human history. And the only thing standing between us, the common worker, from seizing the fruits of our labor from the cowardly capitalist class is the cops. The capitalists themselves will never defend themselves. They're all like, what's Jeff Bezos gonna do? Like, inject steroids and fight someone for like a minute before he gets overtaken by a mob? No, that's what the cops do for Jeff Bezos. Understand your role in society and history. There were so many incidents of people rising up in the past. They resisted law enforcement to make sure working people of the future were less oppressed than they were. And now, there are workers in a capitalist society doing the same.
State of the state.
And that's been the State of the State.
State of the state.
Thank you for listening to the Society Show.
Society.